Okay, everybody, we're here for our second cutting in method lesson. Last time we made the buttermilk biscuits, and this time we're going to make a pie dough. I'll show you how to make a pie crust, and then also how to put together an entire pie, so you can see that. Again, the cutting in is having the flour mixture. So this is flour and a little bit of sugar and salt. That's about it, mixed together. And then cutting in, working in that cold butter to get it into little bits. And the pie dough also uses a drizzle of ice water as the liquid to help it come together as a dough. And the butter, the melting of the butter and the steam from the butter is what creates those flaky layers in your pie crust. So we will start with this and see how we do. Okay, so here we have our mise en place. Remember, super important in baking, super important to get everything organized and together before you start so that you can get everything in the oven in the optimal time. So this is the mise en place for our pâte brisée, which is French for pie crust or pastry crust. So what we have in this bowl is 2 3/4 cups of flour, 1 1/4 teaspoons of kosher salt, and a tablespoon of sugar. So we're just gonna whisk this a little bit, just break it up and mix it together. And then we have 1 cup plus 2 tablespoons of chilled diced butter. So that's about 2 1/4 sticks. So we're gonna put that in. And just like we did with the biscuits that we made earlier, we're gonna break up this butter and kind of work it into the flour with our hands. We are trying to get this mixture to kind of have the butter be the size of peas, like green peas. So we're just gonna kind of work it between our fingertips, break it up a little bit, knead the flour into it until we get the right texture. So let's do that. Okay, now we have the butter kind of mixed in. It's kind of getting to a wet sand texture. We have some bigger pieces and some smaller pieces. That's okay for right now because we're gonna continue to work on this dough a little bit with the ice water. So what we have is about 1/4 cup or a little bit more of ice cold water. I have this in the freezer just until we are gonna use it now. So I'm gonna drizzle part of that in, maybe about half. And just like with the biscuit dough, we're just gonna work this together and keep working it until we can get this dough to come together. So you wanna have a little bit of extra water on hand because sometimes it takes just a little bit more depending on your flour, and it can be a little bit variable. So just to make sure we can get it together. So I'll put the rest of that in there. And see how it's starting to hold together, kind of like wet sand. So we wanna let that flour kind of absorb that water. And we are still working a little bit on breaking down our bigger chunks of butter in there. But we still want to leave those chunks, those pea-sized chunks, so that we can get some really nice flakiness out of this. Okay, it's coming together, but I think I need a little bit more. Let's put that last bit of moisture in there. I'll get a little bit more ready just in case, because we want to get it to the point where it just comes together and there isn't a lot of dry. See, there's a little bit of dryness still in the bottom. And part of that is just giving it time to absorb that water. So we don't want to knead this too much. We just want to get it to stick together. I have a little bit more dryness, so I'm just going to put a smidge more water in. That's probably about a tablespoon maybe. And I think that's going to be plenty to get this to come together. So now we see like it's sticking together more like a dough, like a shaggy dough. So what I'm going to do is get this off my hands. I'm going to, again, I have my pastry mat. You could do this on a clean counter too. I just have grout lines in my counter, so I don't like to work with things on there. So I'm gonna dump my crust out here. Make sure I get all those bits out of the bowl. And then I'm just gonna work on kind of shaping this together. It's sticking together really nicely. If there's any little bits, you can just kind of drag them in from the side and kind of, you know, think of it kind of like a Play-Doh type of situation is kind of what you're looking for, like a little bit dry. Okay, so we'll form it into a disc like this. And then this is enough for a bottom crust and a top crust of a pie. So I'm going to take my handy bench scraper, cut this in half, and with each one of these, let's get some of that dough. Don't want to waste anything. With each one of these, we're going to kind of form a disc. And you can see a little bit now, there are kind of places where there are chunks of butter or streaks of butter. You can see the lightness of that. That is perfect. That is what you want to happen. So we are going to form this one into a disc. It's okay if it's not completely, you don't need it to be completely a smooth dough. It just has to hold together. Because again, that flour is going to keep absorbing that moisture, so it'll get there. See, there's a big chunk of butter right there. That's nice. Okay, so what I will do with these is wrap each one in plastic wrap, and then it'll sit in the refrigerator. We want to chill these for about 30 minutes at least. You can go up to a day. You could make this a day in advance. We just want to get these ingredients nice and cold, because remember, in the cutting in, you want everything to be as cold as possible before you bake it, so that you really get that melt and that steam from all that butter and the liquefiers. Okay, so 30 minutes and we will revisit it. Okay, so we have our little pie dough discs out of the refrigerator. They're nice and chilled. So what we're gonna do is start out our first one. Again, this is one of the good things about these baking mats. This one I have, you see it shows you kind of outlines for inches. So here we have a 9-inch circle, so which is what the bottom of my pie plate is. So I'm gonna roll it out just a little bit bigger than that, so we get some overhang. So I'm gonna put some flour on my board and on my roller, and I'm just gonna start to roll this guy out. And I'm gonna kind of work from the center out and just try to keep it as even as I can. You can see there's big pockets of butter in there. That is what we want. That looks great. So let's roll it out. And as I'm rolling it out, I will kind of patch these little cracks that form at the end with my fingers and just kind of keep doing that. So let's roll this out all the way flat. Okay, so now we have our dough kind of rolled out to bigger than the bottom of our pie plate. And you can see here really nice and well, there's big streaks of butter throughout this crust. That looks beautiful and just what we want. So what I will do, I'll show you kind of a trick to get this in the pan. So I'm just gonna flour my rolling pin, and then what you can do is kind of grab onto the dough and roll it right onto your rolling pin, kind of loosely. And then kind of put it down and you roll it right back onto your pie plate. So we'll do that. I'll get this kind of centered. And it's okay for there to be overhang at this point. This is kind of what you want. So we're gonna let that crust kind of overhang. And then what we'll do is we will trim it when it's, after it's filled and we get the top crust on, then we'll kind of trim it after that. So here we have our crust kind of nestled in there. You want to nestle it in the sides and make sure it's all the way down. Okay, so something I like to do with my pies is, this is going to be an apple pie. I have this apple filling here. These are just sliced frozen apples that I had in the freezer, so I kind of thawed them. I put a little bit of sugar, about half a cup of sugar. I don't like to use a lot of sugar because I like my pie to taste like the fruit that's in it. So this is just some sugar, a little bit of cinnamon, some lemon juice, and what I'm gonna mix in is a couple tablespoons of cornstarch. And what that does, especially when you're working with frozen fruit, especially when you're working with berries, apples don't give off as much liquid, but what happens is when the fruit cooks down, say you're doing strawberries or blueberries or something like that, they release a lot of moisture. And this cornstarch, if you'll remember when we used it from our gravies, is a thickener. And what it will do is kind of bind up with that liquid and make the liquid into more of a syrupy or a gel type of texture, so that we don't have like a liquid pie running all over the place. So I'm gonna do 2 tablespoons sprinkled in. And then because this fruit was frozen and not fresh, frozen fruit, the cellular walls have kind of broken down already during freezing and thawing, so that it lets off a little bit more liquid. So I'm gonna put another ½ tablespoon of that in there. And then I will mix this up. Like so. And like I said, I don't tend to use a lot of, see there's liquid in the bottom there. That's what we're gonna try to get bound up with all this cornstarch. I don't tend to use a lot of sugar in my pies. I like them to be really fruity and nice. And I always add lemon juice or lemon zest because I think it's important to have that kind of tartness to break up the sweet. Another thing that I've learned that I do with my pies is I like to put a layer of some kind of preserves or jam in the bottom. And what that does for me is kind of seals off the bottom. So if you do get a lot of liquid, it doesn't quite seep through and make the crust all mushy. It tends to like kind of caramelize a little bit more. So with something like an apple pie, I'm gonna use this apricot. So I would use a lighter flavor. If I'm using strawberries or berries of some kind, then I would use strawberry jam or black raspberry jam or something like that. So I'm gonna put a hefty tablespoon or 2 and just kind of spread that pretty liberally around the bottom and kind of up into the sides. And like I said, what that does for me is just kind of seal off the crust. It adds another kind of flavor component, which is nice, and it keeps the crust from getting soggy. So put that in. And then I'm gonna heap in my apple. I'm gonna try to keep a little bit of this liquid back. Because a lot of it is just the water coming off the apples from thawing out, so we don't need quite all that. And if you're using fresh apples, you wouldn't have that liquid, so. I will maybe put a smidgen of that back in for flavoring. Okay, I'm gonna set this aside and then I'll roll out this other crust that we will kind of drape on top, and then I'll show you how to make the sides. So we'll put this aside for a sec. And then we will repeat our other process with this top crust. Flour in your board. So once again, we have this rolled out, and I'm just going to get it up on my rolling pin. Whoops, let's try that again. I was trying to do that one-handed, not so cool. Get our little pie plate guy back over here. And then we will just drape that over the top. And this is what I am going to do. See, we've got this nice drape and the drape on the other side. I'm just gonna kind of push around the outside of the pie plate, letting this drape over the side. And then there are a lot of ways that people can do it. Sometimes people do it where they fold the crust over. This is already a double crust layer, so I think that's fine. I'm gonna try to find the inside of my rim here so I know what I'm working with. So we have all this overhang. So I'm just gonna take a sharp knife and just run it along the outside of my pie dish to trim out this extra. Now, at this point, you can really get creative with this, and you can take all these scraps and roll these scraps and cut them out with cookie cutters. You can make little shapes, you know, to decorate the outside of your pie, leaves, you know, anything like that. For the sake of this video, I think I will just hang on to this little ball of dough, put it aside. But if you wanted to, you could roll this out and then you could put a little bit of egg wash around where you want to add your decorations, and then you could kind of glue them to the pie with egg wash. You could do that. But what we are going to do is I'm going to take this and grab a dinner fork, a salad fork, and this is just kind of a really elementary look, but it's good for what we're doing today. And you can just push it along the outside. This is a very like pretty traditional look. Another thing you can do is the finger pinch, where you use your fingers. I do this sometimes too, to kind of pinch a crust on the outside. So why don't we do both? We can do whatever we want here. So let's do both so you can see what they look like. You just want to make sure whichever you do that you really are sealing that edge up and pushing those layers together. So that's what you want. Okay, and then you have a nice crust edge on your pie. The other thing you want to do is you want to cut some vent holes. That way, as the steam bubbles out, it just gives it a chance so that you don't kind of have parts of your crust exploding. So we're just going to put a little cross hatch and some little vent holes. The very last thing that I always do to my pies is I take egg wash, which is just beaten egg with a tiny bit of water in it, and I brush the whole top with egg wash. Egg wash, as you know from some of the other things that we have made already, it kind of creates this really glossy, pretty, it's the proteins coagulating, really helps with browning. And in a pie in particular, it just creates this super shiny, glossy top that is, like if you want your pie to be looking like it's in Pies of the Day magazine, you want to brush it with egg wash. It just makes it really shiny and glossy and professional looking and beautiful. So what I'm going to do, so this is nicely covered. I'm going to put this on a baking sheet pan, and I'm going to put it in the oven at 400 degrees for 15 minutes. So you start it out on that higher temperature. After 15 minutes, you turn the heat down to 350 and bake an additional 40 minutes or so. We want to get the outside set and get that browning started, get the crust kind of up to temperature, and then the rest of the time is to cook the fruit inside and finish everything off. Okay, so 15 minutes at 400, 40 minutes at 350. Okay, let's go. Okay, everybody, we have got our super delicious apple pie here. It's still a little hot. I should probably let it cool more, but you can see our crust came out beautifully. It's really flaky looking on the outside. It's really nicely browned. That's from the egg wash. We didn't have any crazy bubble overs or anything, which means we got it sealed up really well. So I'm gonna cut a little slice just to make sure. You'll wanna cool this to just warm. It's a little on the hot side now, so the inside will be a little juicier than normal, but let's see if we can get a good look at this crust. You guys, it smells delicious. Okay, there's our yummy filling. And you can see, I hope you can see from the side, that we have really nice flakiness on our crust. Our apples are tender. Everything looks good. So make this at home. Make your rainy day a little better. Have a good one.